Hello and good night to everybody who's going to be joining me for the start of this series that I will be doing each and every Thursday night for sure, and maybe sometimes Friday night. Let me just wait for some folk to get on so that we can get right on it. I've had to start a bit earlier than the usual, 10 minutes early, because I have a few things that I have to save a little time for afterwards. My wife has a presentation right after this as well, and so that's why I have to start a bit earlier. So God bless y'all. I see my big brother CMB calling the ambassador, y'all. Look him up on YouTube and subscribe to his channel. He's dishing out some wonderful stuff. I see Brother Alexander Smith. God bless y'all. Some of y'all I can't see on the camera, but I'm glad that you are here. As I said before in the announcement, that these presentations are not going to be long at all. I want to keep them within the 20 minutes to 35 minutes time frame. And so to make them just small bite size, dealing with various issues, dealing with Adventism. As you can see, the series I'm working with is Deconstructing Adventism. And tonight, we will be looking at Adventism's crazy and unbiblical beginnings and doctrinal positions. So, of course, share this video, everyone. Invite your friends, invite whoever you think may be blessed by it or may learn something from it or need to be sharpened on some things. Please share it so that they can get a better understanding of the issues that I'll be discussing. I see Elder Mike Holloway. God bless you, bro, and all the wonderful work you're doing on some of these issues as well, especially with Hebrew Israelism. Maureen Carr, Vad Moss, my cousin Dada Glens Charles. God bless y'all and thank all of y'all for being on this evening. All right, so let's get right into it. So we're going to look at Adventism's crazy and unbiblical beginnings and doctrinal positions. And I specifically titled this beginning discussion like this because that's exactly what it is, especially when one looks at it in context of the 19th century Second Great Awakening of that time. Also, given what I know as well about the way Adventists and Ellen White performed a lot of historical revisionism, how they romanticize how their church was birthed. I purposefully gave it this title because this represents what it was. What Ellen White and Adventists do is that they see the Millerite movement from specifically 1833 to 1844, that block of time there as a fulfillment of the Church of Philadelphia, where they, through the historicist method of prophetic interpretation, they see it as that time period that fulfilled that aspect of Revelation 1 to 3, dealing with the 7 churches. And so they see that time period as being marked as a period of brotherly love, where there was so much love and self-sacrifice and heightened godly spirituality among the Millerites. That's how Ellen White romanticizes and revises what truly occurred. And when I was at NCU, when we did the courses on Ellen White and Daniel and Revelation, etc., that's how they presented it. Even as I read their literature, that's how it's presented. But you're going to get not everything, but just a snapshot as to what was going on. So Seventh-day Adventism was birthed in 19th century America at a time that was known as the Second Great Awakening, beginning from the latter part of the 1700s into the 1800s. This period in American history was marked by much religious fervor and fanaticism. The rise of many cults and weird groups and a general expectation of the end of the world and life as they knew it. That's what the Great Awakening saw. The rise of many cults and weird groups and a general expectation of the end of the world and life as they knew it. There were prophets of every description and ilk, each one trying to outprofit the other. There are several notable American groups and churches that arose during this time period, and several of them arose within a 200-mile radius of each other. And when we look at them, they have so many doctrines and themes that are very similar. They interburied a lot of each other's materials and themes and doctrines, etc. The Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, Mormons or Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Advent Christian Church, the Church of Christ, scientists, among many others, saw their genesis from this time period. These churches are often referred to as restorationist movements because they all have a view that Christianity had been in apostasy from the death of the apostles of Jesus Christ to the 1800s when their sect was born. That is why they are called restorationist movements. They collectively see the Christian church as being in apostasy from the disciples died until their specific sect was born, who was basically raised up by God to restore Christianity. They believe that God specifically raised up their church to be the end time church to restore Christianity, primitive Christianity, as they like to refer to it. Because of this, they all have an exclusivist mindset. They all have an exclusivist eschatology and view about their individual church as being the true church for the last days. So Mormons see themselves as the Latter-day Saints. That's what it means. The Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. They are the final Latter-day Church to restore Christianity. Adventists are, this is how they refer to themselves, are the remnant church of Bible prophecy. Jehovah's Witnesses see themselves as the true religion, while Christian Science sees itself as existing to, quote, reinstate primitive Christianity and its lost element of healing. The Seventh-day Adventist Church finds its beginning within this milieu. And beloved, you could research these things out for yourself. Books are available, presentations are available, a number of things you can access that will talk about these things. A quick resource I can recommend is Arthur and Teresa Beam. And the book is entitled "It's Okay Not to Be a Seventh-day Adventist." And some of the things that I said here when they rose on the churches within that 200-mile radius, pages 21 to 29, where they document this. It all started with a Baptist preacher named William Miller. After reading Daniel 8:14 that said, in the King James Version, "Unto 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed," and using the popular 1 day for a year interpretation of Bible prophecy, William Miller was convinced that Jesus was coming in 1843. He calculated to be that date because it was believed that 457 BC was the time when Darius gave the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Miller would then go on to invent 15 proofs of prophetic interpretation that all supposedly led to the culmination of that 2,300 days prophecy to 1843. And you can check this out on the internet at trutherfables.com and just look up for William Miller's 15 proofs. His claims and proof texting and assumptions are ridiculous, brothers and sisters. It's because of the short space of time that I have to work with, I'm not able to go through them in this presentation, but perhaps some other time I can do so. But his proofs are beyond ridiculous. And this is what he used to arrive at the definitive conclusion that Jesus would come in 1843. Miller believed that the cleansing of the sanctuary, which is a phrase in the King James Version of Daniel 8:14, spoken there was the earth that would be destroyed by fire at the second coming of Jesus Christ. Miller's preaching gained traction, and many people began to follow him and anticipated the imminent second coming of Jesus. Many left their churches to join the Millerite movement. And my brother here, Colin, is on. If he's not entangled, busy right now, he can post some sources and sites and what I'm saying here on these things as well. Thank you very much, Colin. I see he's referring to Mystic Americans or Occult America by Mitch Horowitz. You can check that out as well to fact check everything that I'm saying to you here. So many individuals then left their churches and joined the Millerite movement. Ministers who pointed out to Miller and his followers that their date setting was wrong, according to Matthew 24:36, were accused of not loving Jesus, not loving his second coming, and basically lacked faith. And Matthew 24:36, Jesus said, responding to his disciples' question of, when will these things be? That is the destruction of Jerusalem, the sign of his coming and of the end of the world. He said clearly, as for that day and hour knows no man. The angels don't know, no one knows, only the Father. That's what he said. And so ministers of that day, as they heard William Miller speak definitively about when Jesus is coming, they kept on trying to convince them that no one knows the day or the hour. But those ministers, and if you read Ellen White about them, Ellen White had a lot to say that they loved their sins. They were basically evil, and they just didn't want Jesus to come. And so that's why they kept on repeating that phrase. But the fact is, if they had listened, then many of these things would happen. The original time frame that Miller and his followers had set for the second coming of Christ was March 21, 1843 to March 21, 1844. So they just basically set up a time frame, basically a 1-year time frame. Now, March 1843 came and went, and Jesus did not come. Miller and his followers realized that they had forgotten to not count what is called the 0 year when they transitioned from BC to AD. So they recalculated, and this time Jesus was coming in the spring of 1844. For sure this time, they were sure. But guess what? Spring passed, and Jesus still did not come. They were disillusioned and disappointed for the third time. They went back to the drawing board, and based on the calculations for the Jewish Day of Atonement of that year, that happens to on the 10th day of the 7th month, Samuel Snow worked out October 22, 1844 as the typological fulfillment of the Day of Atonement and the second coming of Jesus. This is the one they worked out, but in fact, the Karaite Jews had used September 23 for the Karaite Jews was the time when they had the Day of Atonement and not in October. But again, that's for another discussion. So Samuel Snow, now one of the Millerites, worked it out based on the 10th day of the 7th month that Jesus is coming October 22, 1844, and that's the fulfillment of the typological Day of Atonement and the second coming of Christ. The Millerites were absolutely sure that Jesus was going to come October 22, 1844. They stressed the Day of Atonement and the 7th month so much that they were called the 7th month movement. Whereas before they only had a specific time frame for his second coming, now they had worked it out to the specific day. So before they just had a 1-year time frame, but now they had worked it out that he's coming on the specific Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month, which for them was October 22, 1844. As the Millerites anticipated to be ushered into glory within months, and knowing the specific day of Jesus' coming, Countless of them left their fields in neglect. A lot of them were farmers. They left their fields in neglect. Some of them did not plant anything because they would be in heaven before they could harvest anything. Many of them sold their homes, their farms, and possessions because they would no longer need these things. And crop that was ripe for harvesting was left to rot in the fields as the time for Jesus to come drew near. Some even quit their jobs and rejected job offers. You can find this in It's Okay Not to Be a Seventh-day Adventist, page 36 to 37, Arthur and Teresa Beam. And so some had their jobs, good jobs, so they quit them. Those who were getting job opportunities, they declined them because they won't need these things after all within months. And they know the exact date Jesus is coming. They'll be ushered to glory and be free from all of the cares and issues of this life. Now, of course, they were warned, they were jeered, and they were ridiculed by both the secular public as well as the wider religious church. But these kinds of behaviors often confirm fanatics in their fanaticism rather than serve to awaken their common sense. And so when you see persons are involved in fanaticism, whenever they are being warned and spoken about or seek to be brought to public correction, they interpret that as them facing persecution and as them being godly and being special and chosen, instead of, you know what, awake to common sense. And so movements that begin this way, any sort of common sense you try to speak to them, they always see it as opposition, and it actually fuels their fanatic thinking. Many well-intentioned ministers refuted Miller's date setting and wisely admonished their members to not get sucked into the fervor. But most of these ministers were accused of being indifferent, of being false shepherds who did not love nor want Jesus to come. Ellen White said that. And their warnings were ignored. And you can actually find this from Ellen White's own books, Early Writings, page 233, where she even states some of these things that the ministers were doing, but they ignore all of that. And she accused the ministers of being false shepherds who didn't love and want Jesus to come, and they were in too much sin and they didn't want their sins to expose, and they condemned, and so they ignored those warnings, and they continued in their fanaticism. Some had to even expel members from their congregations for disorderly conduct and fanaticism. And so the Millerites became such a force to reckon with in terms of their unreasonableness and fanaticism that some of these Christian ministers had to expel them from their church as a result of this. Ellen G. Harmon, who would later become Ellen G. White, and her family suffered such a fate. Ellen White and her family were a part of the Methodist Church. When they got sucked into Millerism, they were uncontrollable fanatics. While the pastor would be preaching or church is trying to run with decency and order, these people will just have outbursts. I'm talking about Ellen White. As a little girl, 12, 13, 14, you name it, she would just break out into her fanaticism. Her parents and her family, they would start to lace the minister and the church with a lot of accusations of being sinful and cold and callous and don't want Jesus to come. While they're preaching, they are hurling insults at them. They were extremely unruly and unreasonable. And as a result of that, she was kicked out of her church after, and it wasn't just a one-time situation and then they were kicked out. They were warned over and over and over again. And it's after Ellen and her family were persistent in their unruly and fanatical behavior that they were expelled from their church. So October 21, 1844 was an intense day for the Millerites. Their long-awaited Jesus was one day away. He would come to earth in a matter of hours and rescue them from this earth. He would cleanse the earth and vindicate their faith that they were preaching. Many of them had made ascension robes for themselves and their little ones to be ushered into the presence of Jesus. Now, Adventists continue to vehemently deny that their predecessors made and wore ascension robes, but the historical facts confirm that they actually did. There's a YouTube channel by the name of Academy Apologia, has a video presentation entitled Defeating Adventism number 20, Seventh-day Adventists and Ascension Robes, in which he provides many historical records and newspaper articles from Massachusetts, Maine, Maryland, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, Louisiana, Vermont, Kentucky, Alabama, and Michigan that confirm that they did make and wear ascension robes in anticipation of Jesus' return. You could do a quick Google search and look for the American newspapers in 1843 to 1844. I've read a lot of them myself. Adventists did make white ascension robes in anticipation of being raptured to Jesus. Not only did they make ascension robes, but many of them had climbed up high rocks, mountains, rooftops, and higher grounds, looking for Jesus to burst the eastern sky and rapture his children to himself. But guess what? October 22, 1844 came and nothing happened in the morning hours. As the day drew to a close, still nothing happened in the night hours. When the clock struck 12 a.m. October 23, 1844, the Millerites were devastated. They were greatly disappointed. Seventh-day Adventists still celebrate October 22 to this very day as the great disappointment every year since then. The Millerites were humbled in the dust, brothers and sisters. Their hopes were shattered. Their lives were destroyed. Many were reduced to instant poverty, confusion, and despair, covering almost every face. Both the secular and the religious public jeered them even more. It was disastrous. Now here's the crazy part. You will not see this in any Adventist history book, Adventist preaching, or anything of that sort with respect to what characterized Millerism and Adventism. Listen to me carefully. Many husbands killed their wives and children and later committed suicide. Many husbands killed their wives and their children and later committed suicide. Some mothers, single mothers, killed their children and committed suicide themselves. A lot of young men and women alike were attempting suicide by hanging themselves or jumping off bridges, and some even committed suicide. And before you think I'm making all this up, brothers and sisters, you could check out Arthur and Teresa Beam's book, It's Okay Not to Be a Seventh-day Adventist, page 43 to 44. They have a lot of newspaper articles and documentations, and I have read those original sources myself. Adventism in the 1800s was a crazy movement. Many became impoverished, having sold their lands, houses, having not sowed their field, and some even left their harvest crop to rot. It was complete chaos for the Millerites. Many of the Millerites disbanded and went back to their former churches. But many of them became insane both before and after, into several years of the Great Disappointment. Many of the Millerites literally lost their minds. Many of them went crazy before, as the time for Jesus' coming drew near. Many were daunted by their sins, and I'm seeing some stuff of persons having the video disappear or trouble, but mine is fine. I'm seeing comments from everybody, so it's fine. My internet is fine, so probably check your connection. But mine is fluent over here. Sister Rochelle Bryan says, God have mercy. If you can hear me clearly before I continue, brothers and sisters, just quickly indicate so I can move on. But everything seems fine on my end here. There's no glitch or anything of that sort. Okay, Sherry say no issue for her. Great, great. So the issue is on your end. Let me rewind and come again. Many of the Millerites, husbands were killing their wives and their children and committing suicide, murder-suicide. Wives were, single mothers rather, were killing their children, and all of this is documented, brothers and sisters. They kill their children, then they kill themselves. All sorts of crazy stuff were happening. As the time for Jesus' coming drew near, remember this was an age of sinless perfectionism too, and we'll see that this is a marked doctrine of Adventism to this day. Because they expected to be sinlessly perfect before Jesus come, but at the same time they were burdened with so much sin, so much guilt and unworthiness. Many of these people literally lost their minds even before October 22, 1844, as the time drew near, and after the great disappointment, beloved, into several years of the great disappointment passing, many of them became insane fanatics. They literally lost it. So many Millerites had lost their minds that Millerism insanity was considered to be, quote, more of a public health threat than yellow fever and cholera at that time. You can find this in Arthur and Teresa Beam's book, It's Okay Not to Be a Seventh-day Adventist, page 45. Whereas most of the Millerites recanted of Millerism and went back to their churches, some continued to believe that something did happen, but that they simply had the wrong event. They were dogged, they were adamant, they were unreasonable. Nothing could have gotten through to some of these people. The major group that came out of Millerism, doggedly holding to that something did happen, was what later became known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. On October 23, 1844, Hiram Edson claimed to have had a vision in a cornfield as he and few friends were walking through it. He reported that he saw heaven opened and Jesus, instead of coming to earth to cleanse it by fire, actually moved from the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary into the most holy place to begin a work of investigative judgment or cleansing of the sins of believers. And it is after that work he would be finished. He would then come to earth and cleanse it by fire. This supposed vision by Hiram Edson would give these otherwise hopeless Millerites new hope and impetus to forge ahead with the belief that something did happen and that all of their experiences were right. And you can find this in Advent Pioneers Biographical Sketches and Pictures. This is from the Ellen White Estate itself, pages 10 to 11. Ellen White would later confirm this vision of Hiram Edson when prophetess status was conferred to her by those who refused to accept their disillusionment. She would later assert that Miller's failed prophecy and proof text of Daniel 8:14 was the foundation of Adventism. She says, and I quote, "The scripture which above all others had been both the foundation and the central pillar of the Advent faith was the declaration, unto 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed," Daniel 8:14. And this is coming from her book, The Great Controversy, page 409. Ellen White would go even further to say that God directed Miller's failed date settings and speculative chart and claimed that God purposefully hid a number in their calculations and thus effectuated the disappointment experienced by the Millerite Adventists. She wrote, and I quote, "I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures, so that none could see it until his hand was removed." And this is coming from Ellen White Early Writings, page 74. However, William Miller apologized to the public and renounced his date setting and errors, and also rejected the subsequent movements, groups, and theories that arose out of the Advent movement and the Great Disappointment. He said, and I quote, "I have no confidence in any of the new theories that grew out of that movement, namely, that Christ then came as the bridegroom, that the door of mercy was closed, that there's no salvation for sinners, that the seventh trumpet then sounded, or that it was a fulfillment of prophecy in any sense. The spirit of fanaticism which resulted from it, in some places leading to extravagance and excess, I regard as of the same nature as that which retarded the Reformation in Germany, and the same as have been connected with every religious movement since the first Advent. The truth is not responsible for such devices of Satan to destroy." And this is coming from Sylvester Bliss, Memoirs of William Miller, page 334. William Miller rejected all of their fanciful theories and what they were doing to try to make it look like something did happen. In December 1844, 2 months after the Great Disappointment, Ellen White claimed to have had her first vision. This can be found in Early Writings, page 13. Interestingly, this vision was not published until 1846. And even more interesting is the fact that the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith had died 6 months prior to Ellen White's first vision. Joseph Smith died June 27, 1844, and Ellen White's first vision bears striking similarities to his. Ellen White was very close to Joseph Smith. Mormonism was growing rapidly where she grew up. Dale Ratzlaff documents that one of Ellen White's second cousins had married Joseph Smith. He said, and I quote, "Many of Ellen White's relatives had Mormon connections, and Mormonism was flourishing in the area where Ellen lived in the early years of her life. In 1842, Ellen Harmon's second cousin, Agnes Moulton Colberth Smith, widow of Don Carlos Smith, became a wife of Mormon prophet Joseph Smith at Nauvoo, Illinois." And this is coming from Dale Ratzlaff, The Mormon Connection, did Ellen White copy from Joseph Smith, and you can find it at lifeassuranceministries.com. Ratzlaff then compared Joseph's first vision with hers, and the similarities are ineluctable. They are obvious to see. This Mormon connection, influence, and plagiarizing of themes, views, and concepts is glaring when you actually compare Mormonism and Adventism. From this Great Disappointment, fiasco, and visionary experiences of Ellen White that propelled her to prominence among the Advent group, they would continue to set new dates for the second coming of Jesus just about every subsequent year. In 1851, she said, and I quote, "Now time is almost finished, and what we have been 6 years in learning," that is from 1844, "they will have to learn in months." And this is coming from Ellen White, Experience and Views, page 55. This Advent group would be plunged into further false doctrines and teachings such as the shut door. And the shut door is the belief that the door of mercy was shut in 1844 and that no one else could have been saved except they had believed in Millerism prior to that. This was later changed when a few years down the line, a man did actually become an Adventist, and they were forced to do all sorts of contortions to actually change this to harmonize with what was going on. They would also be plunged into Arianism, which is the belief that the ancient heresy that Jesus is not God, he's a created being. Ellen White and the Adventist pioneers never rescinded their Arianism. They would be plunged into the false doctrine of the rejection of the Christian Trinity, the investigative judgment. They would create a 10 Commandments centered great controversy between God and Satan, which is basically like an arm wrestling match in which there's a possibility of Satan winning the arm wrestling in this controversy, and it's up to Adventists to perfectly keep the Ten Commandments, to vindicate the character of God, and to prove to all the universe and unfallen worlds that God's Ten Commandments are just and can be kept. This is basically what the great controversy theme is. It's an unbiblical view of the nature of God as well as the plan of salvation. They would also have the false doctrine of mandatory and salvational Sabbath keeping, in which the Sabbath is the seal of God. Sunday is currently wrong and sinful to worship God on, and it will soon become the dreaded mark of the beast. They would also confess that the Roman Catholic Church is the Antichrist of Daniel chapter 7 and 8, and also the harlot woman of Revelation 17 and 18. And also that Protestant churches, especially those that worship on Sunday, are all apostate and fallen, daughters of the whore of Babylon, the Catholic Church. They would also contrive mandatory and salvational dieting and vegetarianism, where not only must you abide by the dietary rules of the Old Covenant, the distinctions, but before Jesus come, Adventists must become vegetarians and vegans in preparation for heaven. Meat eating must cease to be a part of their diet. If they continue to eat meat, they will apostatize and be lost. This is a false doctrine. They would also come to embrace a purely physical and materialistic view of humans. Adventists don't believe that humans have an immaterial soul or spirit that is connected with the body and thus give us life on this planet. They see humans as being purely physical, materialistic. They believe in physicalism. Just like how similar to evolution, we're all matter evolved and we're nothing but matter. Well, for Adventists, how they see humans is that we're just material matter. We don't have a conscious, sentient, intelligent spirit, non-material spirit by which God communicates with us, and that comes alive or is born again, changed anew when we come to faith in Christ. They don't believe in that. They believe in physicalism. They would also embrace the false doctrine of soul sleep, annihilation, and also that Seventh-day Adventism is the true church, tasked with a special three angels' messages of Revelation 14, verses 6 to 12, to give to a lost and dying world that will save humanity, including already saved Christians, especially those who go to church on Sunday. And lastly, that Christians will be the eschatological bad people who will unite with the secular governments of the world and enforce a universal Sunday law, beginning with the United States of America. Then it will gain traction to all other countries around the world that will bring on persecution and death to Adventists for worshiping on Saturday and refusing to worship on Sunday. On May 21, 1863, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was officially founded and organized in Battle Creek, Michigan. And to this day, Adventism continues to be one of the most pestering and legalistic churches in Christianity that is spiritually and salvationally destructive to persons and their families. This is a brief snapshot into the genesis of Adventism, brothers and sisters, and its false doctrines. As I begin this series, Deconstructing Adventism, I will stop right here, and I pray that you would research everything I've said here for yourself. And God's willing, next week, when we get back here, we're going to talk about something else. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you would have learned something. I hope that you were blessed by the information. May God continue to bless you and continue to research on these issues to not be deceived by this cult. I'm going to end now, but if there are any questions or anything you want me to address further, I'll hope to address them in the comment section. God bless you all. Lastly, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that when I upload these videos, or you can share them or whatever, you can get a notification when they're on. So take care, everyone. Next week, God's willing, we'll continue as we look at something else in deconstructing Adventism.